Today we are joined by Wayne Key. He'll be talking about fall maintenance tips. Take it away, Wayne.
All right, thank you. Well, today, guys, we're going to be talking about preparing our garden for winter. Catherine mentioned something about lawns, but I'll be glad to take lawn questions later. We can do that. There's not much in here on lawns. I focus mainly everything on vegetables, on vegetable gardening for the late summer into winter time. And I've got a few things on trees and shrubs because I get a lot of questions and a lot of calls about that. When we get ready to get towards winter and towards the cold time of the year. And so, rightly so, I got this really cool picture that should come up. Well, it worked earlier. His battery's dead. The light's not working. Okay, we'll just keep going this way. We'll do it the long way. So we're gonna put our bed and talk about putting our bed to winter, our garden to bed for the winter. A lot of reasons that people do gardening, of course, across the county and across here in the Upper Cumberland. We look at a lot of things like, I think the number one thing that people have really focused on, especially since COVID, where we've been at home a lot, grocery prices are expensive at the store right now. And a lot of people want to know where their food comes from. A lot of times you go in the store, you pick up a tomato or an apple and it says, you know, the little country of origin on the sticker, and it's not necessarily always in the United States. And a lot of us like to know where this stuff is coming from, where our produce is coming from, what we're eating is healthy, how it's been treated, what kind of preservatives or chemicals have been used. And so that's pretty important, I think, for a lot of people. Saving money, I mentioned, grocery prices are kind of high. Having those extra vegetables at home to supplement our food intake for the week is certainly important. And a lot of people like to garden for exercise. I know the older I get, the least likely I love to get on my hands and knees and dig, but once I'm down there, I'm good. It's the getting up and down part that sometimes can be rough. A lot of us like to garden to learn. We have many people involved here in Cookeville and Putnam County in our Master Gardener program. I get a lot of calls from people that are interested in gardening and doing different things in the landscape to learn and to grow. A lot of people like to be very creative. We've got a lot of different kind of creativity going on. You've heard of the pizza gardens. You've heard of the different type of herb gardens. There's several different ways that you can be creative in the gardening world. And I've seen a lot of producers when I go on home visits and site visits to people's houses where they've come up with a new way to trellis their beans or a new way to cage their tomatoes that I've never seen before. Some folks are very intuitive and very creative and have an engineering kind of mind, and they come up with some unique ways to garden in their landscape. And of course, we all want to eat healthy. We all want to eat something that we know where it's grown. We know it has good vitamins and nutrients and antioxidants for us. So eating healthy is important to everyone. Oh, that would help if I pushed the down button. That was our problem earlier. I was pushing the wrong button, Spencer. So as we look into next season, and I know this season is not quite over, but we've got to start pretty soon. We need to start now thinking about next season, thinking about what we're going to do for the upcoming growing season in the spring and summer of 2025. And I think one of the first things on here that I put was record your successes and failures, because there's always something going on that this variety didn't work. This particular plant needs to be moved out into more sunlight. Maybe I didn't trust my beans the way I wanted to. Maybe this particular variety of sweet corn wasn't as tasty and sweet as I wanted. Maybe I want to try a different S2 gene or super sweet sweet corn in my garden next year. So planning it out. This is of course at the bottom from the Unity Gardens in Nashville. It's very unique and very elaborate kind of an outlay, but it's not a very big garden either. But it's a unique way of kind of being creative and placing our stuff out. Thinking about what we want to do next year with our solanaceous crops, legumes, brassicas, kale, beans, corn, potatoes, those kind of things, and being prepared for next year is certainly important. Mapping it out, knowing where you're going to put things, rotating things in the garden from spot to spot, not always putting tomatoes in the same row because of soil-borne issues and soil-borne diseases, not always putting squash and cucumbers in the same place each year for the same type reasons. Rotating your crops in your garden is very important. And that's where we want to plan and talk about that in the fall now before we get too far into the season. And next year, all of a sudden, you're like, oh, I got to get the garden out. Where do I put everything? So starting now is a great time. Measure your garden space. This is a kind of a rough picture layout as far as measuring out where you want to put your things in your garden. Lay it out on a computer or a graph paper or some kind of layout or some kind of design. Stick it up in the wood shop so you know come spring of 2025 how you want to put things, where you want to label things, and get things in your garden displayed. It's always a good idea to draw it out, kind of be thinking where you're going to put things. Notice here we're going to move some crops in different locations from this raised bed to this one or this one. So moving things around is a great idea from time to time. Soil testing is very important. I have a lot of homeowners that'll call or come by the office and bring in soil tests. This is a must for growing vegetables. It's a must in our lawns. It's a must in our row crop forages like grasses and hays. It's very important because without knowing what nutrients are in our soil, you have no idea what to amend, or even if you need to amend anything. Everything could be perfect. You can't just look at soil and say, oh, it's good and dark in color. It's rich, it's got a lot of nutrients, a lot of organic material, and it may, but you don't know what some of those micronutrients are. So doing a soil test in your garden space, whether it's a raised bed or you're planting in the ground or you're in a high tunnel or you're in covered landscape, doing a soil test is certainly going to go a long way. A soil test for your garden or for your lawn, for example, is $20 so that you know exactly what is needed, how much lime to apply, what nutrients you need in the soil. It's definitely a good idea and the first place to start. Our pH needs to be in that 6 to 7 range when you get your results back. The pH is important for optimum nutrient uptake. So if you had a pH that's 5.4 or 7.2, which is out of that range of 6 to 7, then you've got nutrients in the ground, either nutrients you've applied as fertilizer or organic material and compost you put down that those plants can't take up. So that pH has got to be just right in that optimal 6 to 7 range for nutrient uptake, for the products and the things that you're putting out there and the plant to be able to take it up. Otherwise, you know, we have issues, we have problems. You'll have yellowing of your plants, you won't get enough phosphorus or potassium uptake. Nitrogen will not bind to the soil particles, it will move through the soil and not be uptaken by the plant. There are some exceptions. So you got blueberries, for example. They like a pH of 5.2 to 5.5, 5.6. They like that low acidic pH. So there are some exceptions, but 99% of your vegetable crops are going to grow in that 6 to 7 range. Properly fertilized vegetable plants are healthier and able to grow. I try to relate plants to people. When people call me about a fruit tree, a peach tree, or an elm, or a maple in their yard, or vegetables, and they say, well, it's sickly, it looks bad. Whenever we can have a plant that's taking up the nutrients that we want, it's an optimum pH, it's getting what it needs, it's better able to fight off insects and diseases. And that's very common with any plant. So people call me and they're like, oh, my tree has lichens on it. The little gray things that you see on the trees, that's an indicator of typically poor health of the tree. Those kind of fungi and microbes attack that tree because it knows that that tree's on a downhill or decline over time. So just something to think about. Keeping those plants healthy, providing the right amount of nutrients can certainly keep them healthier and keep them from being attacked from diseases and insects. When you buy fertilizer, there are 3 numbers. First number is nitrogen, second number phosphorus, third number is potassium. So it's NPK, triple 10, triple 15, you heard those numbers, because it's 10, 10, 10. When we have a product that has all 3 numbers like this here, this is what we call a complete fertilizer, meaning it has a balanced amount or an amount of all 3 of those nutrients. When we get to something that's maybe like ammonium nitrate or a sulfur-coated urea, it'll be a high nitrogen number, like a 32, 34, 36, 0, 0. So that's what we call a specific nitrogen heavy fertilizer that we want sometimes in our gardens. They're by weight, not pounds in the bag. So they're by weight. So for example, easier way to put that is if you looked at a bag of this right here, it would be in that bag, 10% of what's in that bag is nitrogen, 18% is phosphorus, 5% is potassium or K2O5. Okay, so that's what those mean when you look. So percent nitro, it says it right there. Well, good grief. If you want to get your winter vegetables started without a soil test, I don't really recommend it, but people will call and they're like, I got to do this today. I got to do it now. So do you have a soil test? They're like, no, I have no idea. At that point, we're just shooting in the dark here. So here's a good recommendation. A lot of times we'll recommend a balanced fertilizer, not knowing what they have, a triple 10 or triple 13. When we know that soil sample, we know those soil results, then we know going into winter what nutrients that plant needs. That helps us in the cost of applying fertilizer. If we're buying triple 10 or triple 13, maybe we don't need the P and K, maybe we just need nitrogen. So with the soil test, we know exactly how much of those nutrients we need. So in this case, applying triple 10 may just be money wasted. You may not need those kind of nutrients in the soil. Another thing to keep in mind, it's a great idea, 2 to 4 inch layer of organic material into the soil works great to improve not only the soil structure, it helps those nutrients that you put on to bind to the soil particle and be there available to take up. I mentioned nitrogen a minute ago. Nitrogen is a soluble fertilizer, water soluble. It moves through the soil. So you'll notice on your lawn, we recommend a complete fertilizer in the fall, like a triple 10 or triple 20, triple 15. In the spring, we usually require nitrogen only because throughout the winter, that nitrogen in that fall fertilizer has leached through the soil and disappeared. So when the plants are ready to take off in the spring, the nitrogen load has left the soil for the most part, so that's why we require just a straight ammonium nitrate in the spring to get that quick growth. Because the other two particles, the P and K, are there bound to the soil. Extending your crops. Now, October 15th, and that's tomorrow, and actually we're supposed to have a light frost, I believe. So I've hit this right on the head. According to the National Weather Service and the data coming out of Nashville, for the Cookeville area, when we hit October 15th, we have a 10% chance on any given year of having a frost on October 15th. When we get to October 22nd, here in about a week, we have a 50% chance of frost. And when we get to November 2nd, we're at here in Cookeville on the Highland Rim, we are at a 90% chance of frost. So the farther we go into fall, that percentage raises. So light frost, of course, we know is at 28 to 32 degree range. That's going to make a difference on some of the crops we're going to look at here in a minute. Hard frost below 28. You can imagine in your mind what crops are like, oh my goodness, that's going to be detrimental. So make sure when we look at frost, we talk about this October date. We're looking at crops that are still out there, and you kind of leftover summer vegetables that you need to get harvested certainly before that frost, because there'll be nothing left really, really quickly after that frost diminishes the plant. So some things that are likely damaged by light frost, like tomorrow, Wednesday morning, beans, basil, cucumbers, pumpkin, squash, sweet corn, tomatoes, anything that you had a late planting or a secondary planting. If you planted some beans, then came in 30 days later and planted some late beans, those you need to, this afternoon while it's pretty and it's warm and it's nice and not raining, it'd be a great day to get those crops in and get that out of the garden. Good things that can withstand a light frost that can be extended into frost, say into the first week of November, here in the next 3 weeks. Things like artichokes, cabbages, the lettuces, the radicchio, the Swiss chard, peas, parsnips, all those kind of things are good. For the next 2 or 3 weeks, you should be fine on keeping those in the garden. And then we got the hard frost stuff, the stuff that can handle the ice, the snow, the cold weather, those 26 degree nights, 27 degree, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, parsley, peas, radishes, spinach, turnips. So those can do a pretty good job lasting into the winter and into the cold part of the year. Vegetables have got to have sunlight, and y'all know that, and you know too that with this time of year, our daylight is diminishing. So it's dark, we haven't gone into the daylight savings times yet, but we're getting dark at like 6:20. The sun don't come up to like 6:50. So it's a lot of our daytime is diminishing quite a bit, and they need about 6 to 8 hours for best growth. Things like spinach and lettuce, for example, can grow with less sunlight. They do pretty decent on these kind of days where the sunlight's diminishing. Choose a location as far away as possible from trees and shrubs. So keep that in mind when we start talking about a garden, getting things planted next year. Stay away from shade. Winter protection, think about what you're going to do this winter on some crops. We're going to talk about those in just a second. Winter protection, good soil with good drainage, especially if you're moving your garden from one location to another. Something to think about. Here's some ideas, lots of different things I'm going to show you now over as far as winter protection. Inevitably, everyone likes to plant their tomatoes, by the 10th or 15th of April. Try to get ahead of the game. Try to have tomatoes before or on July 4th. And we can typically run into some of those cold frost dates that extend our last frost-free date into April, towards the end of April. So there's several different methods you can use and that you can do to provide some protection for some of these plants in the spring or in the fall this time of year. PVC pipe, row covers that can be either plastic. Anybody got an idea what would be detrimental to this? Plastic, let's just say that's plastic. It looks like a mesh, but let's say that was plastic. The thing with it is we're gonna hold that daytime heat in there. The next morning though, when sun comes up, we can actually cook those plants in there and it get too hot. Opening that up one end or the other, or opening the sides and letting some airflow in there during the day. A day like today, knowing it's gonna be cold and frosty tonight on those plants, we definitely wanna open that up the next morning. These kind of materials here work pretty good. The mesh materials that are more mesh-like, they allow airflow through them, but they protect from frost. So PVC pipe, super simple to build. Here's somebody's used some windows to create a protection. You got sunlight coming in, but you got good airflow running through these tunnels. So another good example. A lot of people use buckets, super handy on their tomatoes, for example. Got a couple of folks that take a bucket, and their idea, they cut the bottom out of the bucket and put that bucket over the plant, leaving it open at the top so it's not totally closed. They never have to open or close them because that bucket absorbs heat during the day, and at night it gives off that heat just enough to get that plant through the night, prevent frost from setting on that plant and causing damage to the leaves. And they never have to move the bucket, so the plants get so big that they're out of the frost-free dates or the frost dates, and they can move those plants then, let them have full sunlight. Another type of row cover, excuse me, really neat, simple idea. PVC pipes, sheet of plastic. You can get a roll of plastic at Lowe's. You can buy those PVC hoops. Those can be installed pretty simple, pretty easy. You can start your tomatoes and vegetables the 1st of April and outside in the garden, in the yard. Cover those on those cool nights. Pull that off the next morning. Super simple. And you've got tomatoes by May 21st. Well, let's say June 1st. Here's some ideas on some fancy stuff. The Noble Gardens, for example, Mother Earth News, we've got some stuff on quick hoops. I get things like that established. Doesn't look very difficult. I think most any of us in here could build something like that by incorporating some hoops, some row covers over our crops. Here's some tips for those season extenders if you're going to start earlier in the spring or carry some stuff later into the fall and protect it, knowing that it's going to be damaged from frost. Make sure you water under the cover because a lot of these plastics are impermeable. Even those meshes, it's hard to get water through them. And so we don't want extra moisture water on those leaves when we have these cold temperatures and cold nights. So watering under the cover is certainly important. Drip irrigation, soaker hose, anything like that that you can put down in those raised beds. Makes it super simple. You turn on the faucet, you set your timer for 20 minutes, turn it off, you've watered. Take it off on nice days when it's, I think tomorrow's supposed to be kind of windy. Wednesday will be nice, Thursday will be a little bit warmer. Probably through the weekend, you can take that row cover off totally this coming week. Anchor them well for windy days. I went to a producer, a homeowner's house here. This was maybe a couple of years ago, and he had not, he wanted me to come out and look at some stuff, and there was on a day where it had gotten windy the night before, and he had plastic strode in the yard and across the fence and in the neighbor's yard, and so it can be a mess on windy days. So anchor that stuff down. Try to keep that plastic, keep it from touching the leaves and transferring the cold to the plant. So you want to have that airspace. That's your insulation. So you have that plastic over there, and you created a dome effect. The air around that plant behind that plastic is where it's warm. And so anytime you have a leaf touching that plastic, you don't have any kind of an R value or protective value, insulation value, and that temperature cools down the plastic and therefore transfers it into the leaf. Of course, it makes sense. Low to the ground plants do better. They're down, they're lower to the ground. They've absorbed that ground heat from the mulch or the compost from your soil, for example. So these plants like these here, the lettuces, for example, are super easy to grow. They do well being low to the ground. Harvest. Okay, this makes sense. If you've got something in the garden now, we got frost coming. All tender vegetables, harvest those before the first frost. Winter squash, if you've got some of that out still, it can handle a few light frost days. So keep that in mind. It doesn't have to be necessarily, it will not withstand a very cold or harsh freeze, for example. Leave carrots, garlic, those particular crops right there in the garden for harvesting through early winter. So we're talking through the 1st of December. Mark the rows, and this is a good idea, great idea. Mark the rows with tall stakes so that you can find them in the snow, especially if you've got some crops that you're not covered in, that you've not got covered, that can stand the cold stuff like broccoli, for example, and cover them with a heavy layer of mulch to keep the ground from freezing around the crown or the top of the plant. That's why that's important. Planting fall garlic. A few people asked, so I threw this slide in there. It's one I'd done before years ago, and I just threw it back. Purchase them and plan to plant them in October. It says up there, and make sure that you're purchasing those from a cedar plant company. Those from the store are grown in a climate nobody knows where they're grown at. They probably can't handle our type of temperatures and climate here. So not those from the grocery store. Look at plants, bulbs from a seed or plant company. Choose a full sun location. Garlic likes that.
Wayne?
Yeah.
Let me just mention that I did that. That was to try to keep the squirrels out of my pots.
Yeah.
Well, that didn't work.
Yeah.
But the garlic is still happy.
It did okay?
Yeah, I put a little, almost totally dry garlic clove from Kroger, you know, the little mesh containers.
Mesh. Yep, little bag.
You know, just to keep the squirrels out. I put one in every pot. I've got like 20 odd garlics.
Good.
You know?
Okay.
So they
you lucked out. You did good. So
you
pick 20 different garlic cloves from say 10 different stores. Okay. Not, you know, 2 or 3 of them may do as well as you, the others may not. So it depends on where that garlic, the hardiness zone it was grown in. Yeah. So apparently yours, whatever variety of this,
I didn't even think that they would have been like tropical.
Yeah, they could have been from a warmer climate. So just, you know, kind of a risk. I mean, it's nothing, kind of you can experiment like you did with those, and you could get lucky and have a good stand of garlic one year. Pointed end up, planting them 6 inches apart, 2 inches deep. That's pretty common. For perennials, for example, these products, these plants that are listed on the screen here, you see on here, cut to your asparagus 2-inch studs after frost. Add to 4 to 6 inches of mulch over those to keep them protected through the winter. Rhubarb top dressed with manure. Strawberries mulch with straw organic materials about 4-inch deep after the soil freezes. So you want that to freeze around that crown of the plant to lock in those nutrients and protect that particular crown. So that's why they say to put on mulch after the soil has a light freeze. Raspberries and blackberries, remove those floricanes, which have bore fruit this year, those early primicanes, this year's primicanes. Blueberries, protect them. It's super easy with pine bark mulch. Notice on here, rotted sawdust or compost around the base of the bush. Those are acidic or acid-producing mulches. Pine, for example, sawdust, which is mostly pine that you're going to pick up from either sawmills, will help with the pH around your blueberries as that decomposes. They have acids and tannins that are in those sawdust and mulches that'll leach into the soil and help keep the soil with a low pH around them. So that's a good idea. Protect all perennial vegetables from freezing weather, mulch around the base. Super easy. Tag those hard to find ones. You may have some issues. Flags are available. You get the little push-in metal flags. You can make some stakes, something where you can find those things in the winter when it snows and you know where to dig and where to find where you planted them. A lot of times at the end of the season, if we're taking out our tomatoes and squash plants, for example, we got the vines are out there, we got our cages left over, everything's died off and wilted. You're done with the crop, everything's finished for the most part. The most important thing you can do is remove those disease and infested plants. When I say remove, that doesn't mean put them in your compost pile. Many of those diseases are soil-borne. So as you put those organisms, those spores, into your compost pile and they rot down and you take that compost material back to your garden, you're reintroducing some of that stuff. So take that out of the landscape, to the dump, trash bag it, whatever you need to do to get it out of there. And tomatoes and squash are going to be the 2 most common or highly easily infected by diseases. So they're going to carry and harbor the most disease problems through winter. So that's why we say take them out. Don't turn those plants under, don't make mulch out of them, don't disc them into the garden or anything like that. Remove the weeds with seeds. So that stuff that's gotten really big and you've neglected and you're like, oh, the garden's done. Just let it go, let Mother Nature take over. And you've got Johnson grass in there that's 7 foot high, and you've got ironweed, the purple with the purple top on it, or some goldenrod with those yellow seed heads. Get that stuff totally out of there, because if not, you're going to turn those weed seeds back into the soil and here comes a new crop in 2025. So just kind of keep that in mind. Leave the rest, you can turn those under. Those other crops can be your lettuces, your leaves, your radishes, anything like that can definitely make compost in the future. In this video, you see, have y'all ever seen this weed? What we call giant foxtail or green giant foxtail. It's very common. It grows very prolific. In this particular garden situation, you see it's fall of the year. The grass is still green because grass loves cool weather. Those forages do, for example. But we've got a colder climate here. It's cooling off. So we've got raised beds. Got some older tomatoes in here that look like they're doing kind of rough. She's got a few red tomatoes here and a few greens left that she might can harvest. But everything needs to come out. Those weeds and things, remove that stuff from the landscape. Or next year, she'll have twice as many green foxtail, and she'll have, you know, produce more seed than she, I promise, wants. So get that stuff out of there. Covering your garden up. Lots of things you can do. If you have raised beds or in the ground garden area, once you get everything done, your cages are out, your stakes are out, your weeds are out, that they're mature and got big weeds on them, a few little grasses and things that don't have seed heads to them, you're fine. Leave that stuff in there to compost and to mulch. Leaves are old or shredded work best. When you mow your yard this fall, rake those shredded leaves up if you can. Trash bag them, take them to the garden area, spread those out. They work great. Grass clippings work pretty well. Straw, composted manure. I will tell you, if you are buying manure from a local farmer, neighbor, somebody you go to church with, somebody that you see here and there throughout town, and they're going to give you some manure or composted manure, or we've got manure at our horse farm or our beef cattle farm, be careful, because there are some residual herbicides that producers can use that do a great job of controlling weeds in our grasses, in our pastures and hay fields. But that product has a lot of residual carryover in the manure or in the straw, the hay itself. If you use hay from that particular cutting, it will kill everything you try to plant next year. So every tomato you put in 3 days will be yellow, and 5 days will be dead. So keep that in mind. Know where you're getting your source and ask about those herbicides. Okay, that's a big long name, it's hard to say. I would tell you, you may not remember it, but if you have any questions, call me at the office. He said he sprayed with this, am I okay? Call me. I'll be glad to tell you. But a lot of producers use those herbicides because they work great. They're very safe for the environment. They just have a lot of the residual carryover in the plant. And as a cow or horse eats them and comes out the other end, that chemical is still present. So it takes, honestly, 5 to 7 years, they tell us, in a compost pile before that product is totally leached out. It can be safe to use. Okay, so be careful using manure. Any kind of compost that you've got after a hard first frost, it works great.
Why?
Cover crop. You want a hard frost on that compost to kill any type of living organisms, any fungi, any microorganisms. That hard frost can help kill some of those. So that works great on composted materials from your compost bin, or if you've got a cage, or if you've got a, what am I trying to think of? Pallets, like the pallet type styles you've seen when people are using to compost leaves and things in after a hard frost. Cover crops are great. My favorite is crimson clover. It's a legume crop like a soybean or a clover crop, for example, will do a great job of fixating nitrogen in the soil and provide you in the spring a green manure crop that you can turn in, plow under, and then you have organic material already decomposing in the soil along with fixated nitrogen in the soil. So it's a very good positive benefit. Crimson clover seed is not cheap, but it doesn't take a lot. Okay, so think about that when you get your garden all cleaned up, disc up and worked up for the winter. You're done with it. Come back with a cover crop like crimson clover. Broadcast seed it, super easy.
Go ahead.
Leaves shredded. Is that going to work on my plants, like ferns and things out in the garden? Do I want to put?
You're fine with those as a mulch product? Yes,
So
that's fine.
leave those.
Leave those.
The ferns.
Leave those leaves around the fern are not a problem.
And other plants like bee balm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is not a problem. That'll protect the roots from frost and freeze. It'll protect the plant it'll help hold moisture throughout the winter around the roots. Great to use leaves around your plant.
What about where you're gonna have tomatoes, though? That's not a good idea for leaves, because they hold the diseases, do they not?
No, we're talking about like your leaves from your yard, like tree leaves, maple, oak, those kind of things. Your needles, pine needles, anything like that can be used. It's a great cover crop. It's great to incorporate in as a compost. It'll compost itself in that garden spot over winter, if you don't already have a compost bin stacked up with all kind of mulch that you can just go to and dig from the bottom and pull mulch out, or dig out compost rather. So the leaves are not a problem, because we're talking about leaves from trees, which will break down, decompose, provide organic material in the soil.
Okay, I have a question about the cover crops. At the beginning of August, I bought some crimson clover seeds, and my tomatoes were all gone because it was so hot. So I planted that where I left my cages, and I planted the cover crop there in the tomatoes to directly enrich what the tomato had depleted. I was out there every morning watering it, and it all died. I mean,
the clover, or the
yeah.
tomatoes and everything?
Hmm?
The clover or the tomatoes?
The clover, the tomatoes were gone.
Okay. When did you plant the clover?
August?
Okay.
Too hot?
Yes, way too hot, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, these are spring, your cover crops are gonna be a cool season cover crop.
Okay.
Rye, wheat, oats, crimson clover. The cereal grains like rye, wheat, and oat do a good job because they're quick cover, they green up, they don't get very tall, they cover the entire soil. The reason I picked crimson clover because it fixates nitrogen because it's a legume. Those cereal grains like wheat, oat, rye, barley are just a cover, just a green crop you can then turn into soil.
So
And that's going to be a October, early November plant.
Oh, okay.
When your garden's cleaned up and you've got everything gone, your tomato stakes are gone, your row stakes are gone, you're ready to till up the garden and work it and get it worked all up, come in with a cover crop now in the fall to cover it for winter.
Okay.
I may not explain that, sorry.
No, that's
Yeah, that's what a cover crop is. It covers that soil throughout the winter, keeps you from having any kind of wash problems or material that's moving off the way. If we get heavy rains or heavy snows, it holds the soil in place. That's why we call it a cover crop. So it covers and protects the soil. Okay. This is a great one for composting. I see a lot of people in raised beds will do this. There's the next slide, I think I'll go ahead and show it, but it shows using cardboard, for example, as one of your bottom layers in your mulch, either in your mulch pile or in your compost, your raised beds. I'll get my words right here in a minute. Here's another good example of how you can expand your garden and how you can make that area, starting out with cardboard, coming in with some soil, with leaves, grass clippings, and this slide then kind of shows you how to create that lasagna garden, that mulch layers in your raised beds. For example, they use rocks in this raised bed as their surrounding. They started out with existing surface, coming with cardboard. My wife's grandparents in their garden always used newspaper because they got the newspaper back then every day. And so they would put in 3 or 4 or 5 sheets all around their tomatoes, all around their peppers, around their squashes to prevent that soil-borne fungi from splattering up from rain throughout the summer. And it mulched, it kept the weeds out, did a great job in their garden. In this scenario, this raised bed, they went with cardboard or paper, straw leaves, manure or food waste and manure, straw and leaves, so it's kind of a layered effect like a lasagna. And does a good job to break down and give you the opportunity to plant those plants. And as the plants grow, this stuff is rotting, it's decomposing, it's got microorganisms that are breaking things down, rich in nutrients. Here's another layer just kind of showing you those different layers of creating that in a raised bed. So if you don't have just 16 inches of good rich topsoil to fill that with, you can come in with this layered effect and create your own highly rich composting material in that raised bed. This next one, okay, yeah, I forgot about this one. So in a new garden spot, they picked a spot here, looks like it's right next to the road. Probably the front yard looks like, Catherine. 8 to 12 inches in both directions, so we're gonna go horizontally and vertically, both directions. Clean out any roots and weeds. This is a good time then to add soil amendments. Any kind of compost material, the manure from your horse farmer down the road, somebody at church that gave it to you that's safe to use. Till those kind of things in, rake it level, cover it up. I tell you something that's great for people to use in the spring before we go into summer, before you plant into that. It's called solanation, or where we actually kill off all microbes, all diseases in the soil by covering it with plastic. So using to solarize it, or to kill off those organisms, using black plastic, some concrete blocks or something in the corner to hold that plastic down throughout the late winter into the spring, works great. The soil's heated, that superheating of the soil under that black plastic kills those microorganisms, kills those kind of things that are detrimental and harmful to the plant, the funguses, the viruses, those kind of things. They do a great job of solarizing the soil and getting it, I'm trying to think the right word here. I'll think of it in a minute.
Neutral.
Kind of neutral, there's another word though, sterilization, sterilize, to sterilize the soil, that's what I was looking for. Doesn't harm the microorganisms as far as earthworms, grub worms. They're going to be down 4, 5, 6 inches. They're going to be great. They're going to be creating tunnels for water, for airflow. They're doing a good job. You're killing off those microorganisms like the fungi, the protozoa, the things that are going to be detrimental, the viruses that could be problems with your crop coming in later. So a good cover up of plastic works really, really good late spring into summer before you plant. Raised beds, I get a lot of calls. I got some copies for all y'all on raised beds I'll give you here in a minute. Raised beds are becoming more and more popular. People that have smaller lawn space, they may not want to till up the whole entire yard, and they can even create some unique things with these designs and in the landscape and cause it to be very, you know, they can keep it simple. They could just be boxes like these were done here. Lots of different ways you can do it. This one over here looks like it was actually like concreted in like the foundation of a house. I mean, that is super heavy duty. Why in the world would they have this little walkway in here? So you can reach everything. You can reach into here, you walk around the outside, you can reach it. It looks kind of silly at first, and I thought the same thing here. I'm not sure how you could reach everything, but maybe you can from that little indention, or maybe that's just a design flaw. Maybe they ran out of blocks and they just decided to turn it right there because they didn't have enough. But raised gardens are becoming more and more popular. Lots of different ways you can do it. You definitely these particular raised beds do a good job keeping out a lot of our rodents and problems in our yard gophers, for example. Here's an example of in these raised beds. We talked about branches are a good idea. There was a picture up there a minute ago of branches. Any kind of rough mulch or rough wood chippings, grass clippings, newspaper and cardboard, compost. Those are the kind of materials to add into those raised beds to start decomposing and start creating a rich environment for those roots and those vegetables to grow. Oh, there's the wood. Picture up there, they started a box and started the wood at the bottom. Some more raised bed ideas. This is at Kathy's house, I'm sure. This is very, very fancy, very nice. Everybody here wants one of those. Very, very well done, put together. Here's some more of your cardboard issue at the bottom where they've layered that bottom with cardboard before they start their other materials. Here's one line with newspaper. Here's a small 3 by 8 box that they've got some row covers, ready for row covers to go on. They're ready to start their mulch and the materials in there. So something I threw in here because a lot of people don't think about it, but taking care of our equipment is important. It's not maybe part of the garden directly and part of the harvest, but you know, cleaning up our tools, drain your garden hoses and put them away so they don't freeze and bust this winter. We had one, I guess it was at the barn, and it had a sprayer nozzle on it, which as you know, those don't let water out unless you squeeze them. And it was still connected to the hose. It was full of water. I had a mess. I had to replace the whole hose bib into the barn, and it was a mess. So draining those hoses, taking them off there, putting faucet covers over your nozzles on the house are a great idea. Clean up your garden tools and put them away for the winter. WD-40 is what I typically use on your tools, metal tools, for example, on your loppers, your clippers, chainsaw blades, anything like that. This says treat your wood handles with beeswax or lemon oil. Mine are used well enough that they've got enough, I guess, human oil and flesh and skin on them that they're pretty slick and pretty coated. But on some new products, you might, especially if you've got some new tools that you bought this year, and get them sharpened and get any kind of repairs done before winter gets here. Lawnmower, your power equipment, is a great idea. Our university ag engineering folks tell us using a stabilizer like that particular brand on the screen, and I'm not promoting a brand here, I'm just showing you an example of one, is a great product to use to keep the gasoline in your weed trimmer, in your mulcher, in your lawnmower, whatever you're using around the yard. It's got a gasoline powered engine. Will do a good job to keep the gas fresh throughout the winter. Some general maintenance, there's a lot of stuff, and I probably should have made a bunch of different slides out of this. I just kept typing, and I was like, that's good. Empty all your outdoor containers to keep them from cracking during the winter. Any kind of pots that you've got out back, any landscape pots, if they've got dead flowers in them, Get that stuff out of there, remove the soil, start fresh next year with new soil, especially if you've had some disease problems in flowers or vegetables in pots. Store them upside down, wash them out, clean them up. I did put this one because it's a pretty handy trick I saw at a guy's house. Hang a bucket over a hook at your tool shed, and that's where you can put your hose nozzles, your sprinkler attachments, your spa hardening stuff, and it's all together, and you're not scrounging all over the garage or the outbuilding looking for stuff. Mow your lawn and late in the fall as the grass is growing. If a lot of people like to leave that 6-7 inch stubble and just put the mower away in mid-October, and there may be another mowing or two up until, say, Halloween, for example, we can mow the yard, because when we leave all that tissue on there, we get a lot of browning effect at the top of the tissue, because as the plant grows, the youngest part of the plant is always away from the stem, the trunk, the roots of the plant. So that's where it's growing the fastest. That's where the cell wall is the thinnest, and the cells are growing very fast as that plant grows. You know, you got that new young growth at the end of a tomato or on your grass leaves. That's the part that the frost freeze will kill those cells. It'll break down that cell wall. That'll die off. You'll have a very brown yard in the spring, and it'll look pretty rough. So keep that in mind. I didn't put on here, but I would definitely, when you are mowing your yard, 4 inches is a good recommendation. I see a lot of people mowing their yard at 2 inches. And at that point, you start to introduce not only weeds, because you've opened up the soil surface and allowed weeds to germinate, but you've also opened that up and took away a lot of your protection from winter to allow that crown of the grass, the plant itself, the crown where the carbohydrates are, to be killed and not come back and regenerate in the spring. So leave a 4-inch stubble in your yard. Don't leave fallen leaves on sod layers. You've seen those places in your yard where they get wet and they get wet. You got 8 layers deep of leaves. And when you rake that back, what do you have? Bare soil. If we do that now in the fall and get those leaves off of there, rake it up and do a tarp or a sheet, drag them off, give the pollinators some time for winter cover, rake the leaves into loose piles, mulch them up, chop them up, put them on your garden, or use them in your compost bin. Cover your compost pile with plastic or a thick layer of straw before snow falls. That's excessive moisture that your compost pile doesn't need. So if you can cover that, or if you have it in a barrel that you can put a top on it or some way get something covered over it, all that rainfall and winter ice and snow can cause problems with having too much moisture in your compost pile. We talked about nitrogen. Nitrogen's water soluble. That'll move out of your compost bin and soak in the soil underneath. So try to cover that, keep in mind to cover your compost pile. Scrub down, put away your tools, vegetable oil, WD-40, sharpen your blades, be ready for spring. Winter, as we know, is a good time to come in and prune many of our landscape trees and shrubs. So even if you get those things cleaned up, that way they're ready to go when you are ready to prune in the middle of February. Then it's time to start ordering seeds. It's probably not a good idea to wait till April 15th to order seeds. They're either going to be out, a lot of suppliers won't have any, you won't get the variety that you want, you'll be stuck with, here's what we've got, take it or leave it. So try to start early, get that stuff ordered in so that you know you're going to get what you want. We have a ton of resources. You can imagine every time the phone rings, it's a different kind of question. So we have thousands upon thousands of different resources. I brought a few for you, I'll pass out here in a second. These are some links to our home fruit and vegetable calendar, which is great. Month by month, it tells you what to do each month, when to compost, when to do this, when to mow your yard, when you should apply fertilizer, things to do, soil sampling, everything's in that calendar, step by step, tells you month by month what to do throughout the year in your garden, your shrubs, landscape, vegetables, whatever it is. Our UT Extension publications, if you just Google UT Extension publications, for example, you find all this kind of stuff. You can read for months and never see it all. There's a ton of different things. I brought 3 or 4 of 100 I wanted to bring, so I'm trying to give you a sampling, but that's a great site or link. And then a link to our extension office. If you need to find me or my number, or you want to email me something, you can find us at the Putnam County Extension Office here in Cookeville. The things I brought you, I'll pass my building and using raised beds, lots of ideas. Garden planning, plant preparation, and planting. Great little publication there on different things. This one I wrote myself. This one is getting trees and shrubs ready for winter. So we talk on here about proper mulching. You've seen in some landscapes the volcano effect, where you have certain shapes of it. This kind of gives you some ideas of how to correctly put on mulch, how much mulch to use, where to use it. It'll also then on the back talk about pruning, when to prune, not to prune too quickly. A lot of people like to prune in October, November. What's bad about that?
Frost and then
We're in Tennessee and it could be 70 degrees tomorrow and 30 the next day. So you start cutting that stuff off and start pruning your boxwoods, for example, you're gonna have lots of new growth and new shoots emerge before we get into November, December when it gets really cold. We talked about those new tissues. Any of that young tissue, the cell wall is weak, they're young, they're tender, that's what frost is gonna get first. Fertilizing your soil, there's some ideas on here as far as what I said about nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The ratio in a bag of fertilizer will give you some ideas when we're mulching and getting ready to prune and fertilize our trees going into winter. Fall vegetable gardens, this one is a great one because it has, and I know we're past some of these, it has a great little guide in here, a chart. And we have this for cool season, warm season, all types of vegetable gardens. This is the fall one. The only thing bad about this one is we've already passed the September 1 planting date recommended for these fall vegetable gardens. But it's a great one to hang on to, put it in the shed, keep it with your publications and things on planting interval, varieties available, how many seeds per 100-foot a row, how far between the rows, how far to put the seeds, days till you find the first harvest, how much yield you should get per 100-foot a row in pounds. So it's a really unique, really great to look at, quick reference guide on when to plant, how to plant, and how much seeds you need depending on your garden size, okay? That is all I got. I'll give you guys a copy of this. Questions? Anything that I forgot or didn't answer?
I have a question about
Yes, ma'am.
mint that has taken over.
Say it again.
Mint
Okay.
has taken over. I think it used to be in pots and just went through and it's an area in the front of my house. Would I be smart to?
Do you know what kind of mint it is? It is something
like
you planted? So it's something you planted?
Yes, but it was in a pot originally. So it's just,
And it's taken over?
yeah.
Is it in a location, obviously you don't want it there, correct?
I've got too much there.
You got too much?
I want
You're-
it in a pot, to stay in a pot.
Thanks, Wayne.
You're welcome. If it's anything that you didn't want, for example, this time of year when we have above 60-degree daytime temperatures, you could use a non-selective herbicide and take it out specifically. Or your best bet, especially if you're going to use some of that mint throughout the year or you want to keep part of that, would be to specifically hand pull, hand hoe, hand remove those plants that you didn't want. And that sounds like a big task, I know.
Yeah, it's very big.
If you're like, I don't want this stuff, I want rid of it, all of it, then a non-selective herbicide.
Why wouldn't a tarp or something work?
It would do a pretty good job. The only problem with using a tarp this time of year, and I may not have mentioned on there, is just the fact of getting it secure. Get that thing down on the ground, get some blocks. It's gonna be a little unsightly. You're gonna have this big piece of black plastic out there that's gonna be covering up these plants, and you have to have some blocks and bricks and rocks and things to hold that plastic down. But it would do a great job of killing off those plants, killing it all the way to the roots, solarizing the soil. That wouldn't be a bad idea. Especially if you've got a definitive edge that you can mark it off and this is what I want to kill. That's what I want to
My
leave.
back would like that better.
And your back would like that. It wouldn't be as harmful as maybe using some herbicides. So that's just, that's your options, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? Anything I forgot? All right. Thank you all for being here.
I have a question about a plant.
Okay.
My sky pencils, I've had them before, but they're browning, and when I scrape the stem of it, they look dead. I didn't think they did that.
As far as going into like a dormancy this time of year,
Yeah, but they almost look like they're dead.
it sounds like they're dead. Because they shouldn't this early. Now, if you were to get out there in the middle of February and find some of that kind of tissue, you could still have some living tissue that's deep in the stem of the plant. You just may not see it fingernail deep, but if you're seeing something now and it's already starting to die, I would think you may have lost those plants for some reason. We mentioned diseases and how things like lichens show that a tree is kind of weakened. I get a lot of people or folks call, and this is a great time of year. You know, we've had the cold freeze of, what was that, Christmas of 22, we had the cold temperature. Then in fall of 23 and fall now of 24 in late summer, we've had some extreme dry conditions. And so throughout those repetitive attacks, so to speak, on plants, we've started to see a lot of decline and a lot of trees that are dying off earlier because of the stress. Anytime a tree is stressed, insects and diseases are able to come in, just like with people. If people are stressed or have something going on with their body, they're easier to get sick, easier to catch a cold. They're maybe not taking the right amount of vitamins and protection. They're not getting enough sleep. So plants are the same way. If they're stressed, like we've seen from the drought and the cold, freezing weather, those repetitive years after year can really cause a decline in a lot of our landscape plants and trees and stuff. So that may be what's going on there.
Yeah, strange. There was 3 little ones kind of by themselves, and all of a sudden they just turned brown.
And everything around them's doing good. That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, they were planted that year, so 22.
They were planted then.
Yeah, I think that was the year they were planted, and they made it through. But maybe they're feeling the effect now.
Those may you have to replant. It'd be interesting to see what they do in the spring. Maybe you should pick a different variety, different species, different something else.
Maybe. They're the perfect height. And they're not gonna grow fast.
They're not gonna grow fast. They're slow growers, right?
We want to control
Thank you,
it.
That's
Spencer.
right.
Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you.
I guess it means I need to go home and do some work.